residential tech talk, lighting specialist to residential tech.
Welcome to Residential Tech Talks. I'm Jeremy Glowacki, Executive Editor of Residential Tech Today. On this week's podcast, Jeff Klida joins us from Bay City, Michigan, where he serves as Vice President at EPV Screens, the division of Elite Screens dedicated to the custom install market. From front projection and acoustically transparent to ambient light rejecting and polarized 3D materials, EPV provides electric and fixed frame projection screens that fit just about any viewing experience. At CEDIA Expo this past September, the company featured the Sonic AT8 ISF Efinity, their newest fixed frame solution that uses a multi-layer tightly knitted fabric with bonded black backing, and the upgraded Darkstar Max UST-FR, which is a motorized floor rising projection screen with ceiling and ambient light rejecting technology. Today, we'll dig into projection screen trends and developments, learn more about EPV's evolution as a brand, and find out about our guest and his career path to where he is today. Jeff Klida, welcome to the podcast. How are things for you on this first day of November up in Michigan?
Thank you. Very good. Very cold. We had a great summer and a great fall, but yeah, it just recently got very cold. In fact, we had our first snow yesterday, and it's going to warm up a little bit. So nothing too tragic, but you always hate to see that first snow in October.
You do, yes. And we had the same down here in central Indiana, where trick-or-treaters were unfortunately tricked by the flurries of snow as they went out getting treats as it got dark last night.
Yeah, it was
not fun.
It was definitely a chilly one last night. Yes.
Yeah, and so as we were getting warmed up here before we recorded, I asked you where in Michigan you were, and you said Bay City, which sounded very familiar. And then you told me the three, was it the three things or the four thing?
Yes.
The three things that Bay City is known for.
Bay City is the trivia answer to three particular rock and roll questions. And the first, in no particular order. The first one is, where was Madonna born? The second one is, where did the Bay City Rollers take their name? And although they were Scottish in origin, they literally threw a dart at a map and it hit Bay City, Michigan. And then finally, where did Question Mark and Mysterians record their hit 96 Tears, which many people consider to be the first punk rock record. So yeah, that's the three big ones.
That's amazing info for so many music lovers that are in the audience. And I would say I had no idea about Madonna. First of all, I always associated her with more of a Detroit upbringing, and that may be incorrect, but I knew she was a Michigan kid. And the Bay City Rollers, I had no idea were Scottish in origin. I don't know how I missed that.
Yeah, they were. And Madonna did grow up in Detroit. I think she graduated from Pontiac High, just north of there. And there is a mural downtown dedicated. And I think, too, there's an old hospital. It's no longer a hospital. It's where I was born, too, called Mercy Hospital. And it's this old red brick hospital. And that's where she was born. And right outside on that street, it does say Bay City, Michigan, hometown of Madonna.
There you go. Okay.
For what that's worth.
Yeah. You guys are alike in so many ways. It sounds like Madonna. Well, so one of the other fascinating things that I noted in your bio was you're not only a Bachelor of Science in English graduate from Central Michigan, which that isn't so noteworthy, although I don't really associate Bachelor of Science with English typically, but where I went to school, I think it'd be a Bachelor of Arts, but
it'd be a big, yes. And normally it is, yes.
Well, but the one that really stood out was your MFA in English from Michigan State. And so it's not typically the career path of someone with an MFA in English to end up in the CI channel or the electronics business. So it looks like you may have dabbled in some retail in your youth that got you into this business.
Yes. In fact, the way it all worked was right out of graduate school, I moved to Chicago and had a teaching gig at Truman College in Chicago, one of the, I believe it was the seven at the time, seven city colleges in Chicago.
Okay.
And had every intention of staying there until a full-time tenure track position was offered and so forth. But what happened is, frankly, I needed a day job, because I was teaching night classes and a couple that were early in the morning. And I thought, well, what do I know? And I knew a little bit about stereos. My friends were always asking me to hook up their stereos and their speakers and whatnot. So I got a job at Mills Audio Video in downtown Chicago and learned the trade there. In fact, I've always meant to do a shout out to the guy that I always consider my mentor, Fred Thomas, who's retired now, but he's the guy who kind of showed me the ropes, showed me home theater. In fact, he was one of the very early adoptees of home theater and was just a master salesman. And in any case, from there, things got really interesting, and I was offered a position. Long story short, offered a position in Los Angeles with Kinergetics Holdings, which at the time was a group of companies in Los Angeles, including Kinergetics Research, who were best known at the time and historically, I guess you'd say, for their CD players, their amps, and then their home theater gear. They were part of a broader group that included acoustic car audio, and at the time, also Kef and Celestion speakers. I think the idea back then was that they were going to merge all of those brands. And in a sense, I guess you could say Kinergetics Holdings was something of a forerunner to, the Nortex and Linears and Milestone AVs and so forth. It never quite came together that way. But nevertheless, that was my entree into the national side of things. And, of course, I always thought someday I'd go back and teach, but it just never happened, in part because of the travel, that this kind of career entailed and so forth. From there, I did a short stint at Axelo Electric, the cable manufacturer, where I met Brian Rizzo, who will factor into the story later. And then I went to Dwin Electronics, which was really my first video gig to speak of. And Dwin was a fascinating company because the gentleman there who was the owner and the chief engineer was so far ahead of everybody in terms of what they were doing. He was the guy responsible for Harman Video. And we had some really great innovative products, 7-inch CRTs without fans, that didn't run hot, that didn't drift, that were easy to set up, weighed maybe 50, 60 pounds. Completely silent, great stuff. And then, of course, we moved into the DLP era, as the entire channel did. But yeah, in some ways, those were some of my favorite times in the channel. The sky was still sort of the limit, and video was the driving force. Where it just isn't anymore, in the sense that it's mostly home control and that type of thing. And, every dog has their day, so to speak. And then in 2004, Brian Rizzo and I formed ICE Cable Systems. And the ICE, the name came from Installer's Choice Electronics. We started a distribution company on the west side of Los Angeles. That's where the acronym came from. And it was really an attempt, or the basis of the distribution company was to create a platform to launch the wire nationally, and they do very, very well to this day. I was in at this point. In fact, I think I was still in Los Angeles, and I came back in 2010 back to Michigan, and then joined Elite in very late 11. So that kind of brings us up to the present date, in a sense, because I've been here now. It'll be 12 years next month, in fact.
Nice.
And I came to Elite and had a very clear mandate, and that was to create a new brand, a brand of screens specifically for the home theater channel. And it was an awesome challenge, and something that I recognize as kind of a historic opportunity, in that we could really do whatever we needed to do. In other words, we could theoretically create the perfect screen line. And not to say that we would cover every single base and could do all things for all people, not that necessarily, but whatever we did do, we could go point by point, say, okay, whatever we're going to do ultimately with the custom installer in mind, right? We didn't have any legacy issues we had to contend with. We knew with Elite's manufacturing power, we could come in at the low end of the market. So we knew we could be very aggressive price point wise. And we just didn't have any path that we were forced to follow, no compromises that we had to make. There were some pretty wide open lanes for us at the time, in part because, you go back 11 years or 12 years now, and, projectors were a good deal more expensive than they are now. And you didn't have to go too far back from there to where they were very expensive. Frankly, the price of a new car. So, our North Star has always been with screens is to keep that credible, common sense relationship price wise between the projectors and the screens. I think any custom installer would tell you that one of the hardest things to do, and to do on a reliable, repeatable basis, is to sell a screen that's more expensive than the projector. Oh, sure. And that was first and foremost kind of our mission, to offer what we felt to be reference grade quality screens at prices that were really truly commensurate with the price of projectors. In other words, if you go back even 20 years ago, when projectors were 20 grand and doublers and quadruplers were 15 to 20,000, a $5,000 matte white screen, it's like the price of tires for a Ferrari. Nobody objected. But we're in a much different age now, and we have been for certainly the last 10 years. So we were very cognizant of that, that price was ultimately going to be a very loud factor in the screen category. The other thing that we were very intent on doing as being as simple as possible, make simplicity a virtue. In a matter of speaking, we looked at some of the other brands, and obviously these brands have been around for a long time, very successful, very well known, and still are. But when we asked dealers, what would be the sort of thing that would put you off from looking at another or a new screen line, we got back a lot of answers that indicated it was the complexity, right? The 80-page catalog, the 100-page price sheet. And, what do we do here? And what screen do we use there? And I have no doubt that those lineups were at one time sensible. But we looked at it differently and thought, we're going to, and I typically don't like using this term, but we're going to curate it, right, for the dealer. And, we identified what we thought were really the three essential screen categories. Matte white, obviously, ALR, which, in 2012 was new, but it was clear that was going to be a very important category, and then acoustic transparent. And then rather than do the typical, good, better, best, reference, limited edition, ultimate, we thought, we're going to make one matte white. It's going to be the very best we can make. We feel that if you compare it to anything else out there, regardless of price, it would be credible, as good, or perhaps even better. And that was going to be our matte white screen, and ditto with the ALR and so forth with the acoustic transparent. And it made things really easy because it's very easy to see the EPV line at a glance, and based on your room conditions and your size and your frame choice. Obviously the two major frame choices these days are kind of the old school hand wrapped velvet, and then the edge free or thin line or thin bezel. We call it, our terminology for that is Efinity, just kind of a play on infinity pools and so forth. There's also EF in our product line, means edge free.
Okay.
So somebody can look at our lineup and say, okay, I need acoustic transparent screen, 135 inches diagonally, and I want an edge-free screen or edge-free frame. And there you go. There's one model to choose from in that sense. And one other thing we did, and this was very important to us from the very beginning, although it took us a little while to get there, we were big believers in the ISF proposition, the Imaging and Science Foundation. And we were determined that at some point, all of our screens would be ISF certified. And we can say, and we could have said this for the last maybe 4 years now, that all of our screens are fully ISF certified. So in that regard, we're not really asking anybody to take our word, for the video quality of our screens. That to me is a real effective shorthand that anything that's ISF, anything in the video category, it's going to be a top flight performer.
Yeah, that's a legitimate badge of accomplishment there. What does it take from a screen manufacturer's sort of perspective? I think of it on the video side, but then the screen is an essential ingredient. So what does it take for that qualification to happen?
Yes, for the most part, the two categories that are paramount are contrast and color, and there's various contrast and color tests that they do to make sure, and also artifact. Like for instance, on an ALR screen, some of them out there are known to hotspot or sparkle.
Yeah.
And it's my understanding that if a piece went in for testing and there was visible sparkle, that it wouldn't even make it to the next phase of testing. It would be rejected outright. One story that I remember, and I hope I have this exactly right, even if the details aren't exact, the spirit's right. We sent in some of our early samples of our Dark Star, which was a very, very high quality ALR. It was difficult to manufacture. The yields were low. It was quite expensive, especially for us, but it was great. It got great reviews. It was a cover story review, I want to say, in the October 15 issue of Home Theater. And they called it at the time the best ALR they'd ever seen. We sent in some samples, and we were told that, what do you want, the good news or bad news? What's the bad news? It didn't pass. Like, okay. The good news, though, is that it was off on a particular color test, 0.003. So just, and it wasn't visible, but the standards are the standards. And that's another great thing about ISF is, said, but what they would do, because it was so close, they would, if you sent different production samples, that they would retest, and if the average came out ahead, that it would pass. Weeks went by, and I remember asking our product guy, Jaime, hey, have we heard from ISF? He said, yeah, we have. And it was another one of these good news, bad news things. Said, what's the bad news? It didn't pass, right? The good news, though, is that every single batch, right, every single production sample was off by the same amount. He said, just, it's very rare that you see that kind of consistency in manufacturing. So that was kind of a point of pride with us too. Now, it was an unusual piece also because it was a 1.4 gain, right? And that what was, keeping it ultimately from being certified, at least as I remember it, and somebody might correct me, but we stopped making that some years ago, but continued on with our Dark Star Ultra short throws, and our Polar Star, which is our more common ALR. It's an angular reflective. The Dark Star was a retro reflective, which refers to the light path as it hits the screen and so forth. But yeah, that's sort of what ISF looks for. And, I can think of no other licensing organization. It's been so long since I've worked with
Hmm.
THX. I mean, literally 6 to 27 years ago that I don't remember their procedure, but ISF is aces in our book in that regard. So
Today's episode of Residential Tech Talks is brought to you by NICE, the global manufacturer of smart home security and building automation solutions. NICE is bringing together 30 years of innovation with award-winning products from ELAN, SpeakerCraft, and Panamax to create a holistic ecosystem for builders, integrators, and consumers. Learn more about how you can create one home with one solution at go.niceforyou.com/RTT. Well, you mentioned ultra short throw. That seems to be the most ongoing recent trend in projection that really is influencing not only projectors but screens, and that area of having to consider the angle of the projection image
yes,
is what's challenging for a screen, right? So you have to have the formulation to where it absorbs the material, the reflective, projection onto the screen the right
yes,
direction, whether that's above or below. And I saw example, applications at CEDIA of an Epson short throw in a ceiling mount, which I don't know why I hadn't seen that before, but it's like, what a
yeah.
great idea. That's another way to do it besides having it on the floor, aiming up.
Yeah, well, part of the problem and sort of the inherent physical problem with doing a ceiling mount or an above mount is that you're now directly competing with the overhead ambient light. And when
Uh,
you think about it, for the most part, ambient light is always going to be above, right? In the form of, a room light, skylight. I mean, obviously, there's windows as well. Um, so it really limits what you can do. In fact, I often tell dealers who are looking to do that is that you're going to have to keep the area around the screen so dark so as not to do that, that you might as well control the light completely and then to just use a good matte white screen.
right.
um, in fact, that's the one thing about ultra short throw screens that are really interesting. I was going to a distributor. This is pre-COVID, so I don't recall if it was 19 or 18. But I was running. I was a little late from the airport, and they were doing a show with a very expensive ultra short throw projector. 50,000 it was. So that may tip some people off as to what it was. But as I'm driving there, they called me and said, we think you guys sent us the wrong screen. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, because it's white. Like, huh. Like, I can't imagine they sent the wrong screen. But I got there and instantly saw that it was upside down.
Hmm.
So it was reflecting all the light from the ceiling. So it was as white as a matte white
Oh,
screen.
wow.
Orient it correctly, and it's charcoal black,
Interesting.
right?
Okay.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
So that's what you had to be careful of, when you plan to do that, because it will absorb all that overhead light as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
the other limitation, as great as ultra short throw is, and it's definitely been a boon to the channel, is that you're presently limited. We have the largest fixed frame ultra short throw at 123
Hmm.
inches. Everybody else is about 120. And it's only been in the last couple of years that there have been projectors that have been able to go bigger, ultra short throw projectors. I know Samsung has one that does 130, but the machines that make the ultra short throw screen material are limited to 60 inches, a roll of 60
Hmm.
inches. And you would think on the one hand, well, wouldn't it be relatively easy to just extend that? It turns out that it's not. It's actually really, really complicated and really, really expensive. And I know we're working on it. I don't know where we are with it, but I don't believe there's anything forthcoming in terms of, because if we could make a 130 or a 135 or a 150, we would have done it by now. But yeah, there's some real just locked in physical challenges to doing that. Yeah.
And so, are you really seeing that a lot of where your sales are coming from are ultra short throw applications these days? Or are you still getting quite a bit of
No.
two-piece traditional
Oh,
projectors?
yes. It's still mostly two
Okay.
piece. There is a sense also in the channel, and to be just brutally honest, that there the ultra short throw market is just a little bit crossing the line to DIY,
Okay,
right?
sure.
And so a lot of consumers think, oh, I can just do this myself. Well, it's not an easy thing to do, either to do the correct alignment,
Hmm.
keep it aligned, and do that install. But you know more of them are prone to attempt that,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's sort of been a limiting factor in the CI channel. Um,
Just
but yeah,
embracing it, right? Like, yeah.
exactly. And the other thing is that for several manufacturers, and this has been the case really since the beginning, the projectors are actually more than, or I'm sorry, less, and in some cases a good deal less than the screens, at retail. And that's a very hard thing to sell,
Yeah.
But as it turns out, these ultra short throw ALRs are very expensive to manufacture. But I think most customers and most end users can understand that a box, a projector, could be 3,500 or 5,000 or 6,000, whatever the price is. But they see that screen, and in their mind, it's a piece of material. They Now, why is that 5,000? I don't get it. So, and it's been a challenge, in the industry generally. Um, but but no, and we definitely have the most competitive piece out there, with our Dark Star 2 Ultra Short Throw. But I think that it still has room to grow. It will grow, but I don't think it's going to be a revolution,
Yeah.
especially because you got that size limitation. And a good way to consider it is that just before COVID, literally January 20, I did a kind of an internal survey of all our screens and sizes. I was doing some forecasting or something. And I noted that at that time in fixed frames, the 120 size outsold every other size combined for us, literally every other size. And at some point, I think it was probably last year around this time, I noted that not only was that no longer true, but that 135s now outsell 120s. And some people think, well, it's because televisions are getting bigger. Now, it's not really that, because even like when 85-inch panels came out, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, people would ask, do you think it's going to hurt projector screen sales? Like, no, because when we launched EPV in 2012, we decided we weren't even going to do an 84, or 92 for that matter. Those were sizes that were dictated by the lumen output of CRT projectors, to be
Okay.
blunt. And they hung around, I think, just because. But uh, really, what's going on is that on a per lumen per dollar basis, projectors keep coming down, and you can fill a 135 with relative ease and without a lot of money. I think that's so true that if 20 years ago, if a 7-inch CRT was able to put out that kind of light, 135s would have been dominant then. It's not just that people keep wanting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like what will the projector allow? What will the dollar allow?
Right.
To a large extent, and that's where we get that. Yeah.
So one of the featured projectors at CEDIA was the Sonic AT8, which is an ISF projector
Yes.
screen. What are some of the features that make that a successful product for you, or be proud of?
Yes. So that replaced our longtime acoustic transparent A4K. And that was a very critical piece in our history. It was really, if there was one screen that put EPV on the map in the early days, it was the A4K. And while it wasn't the first woven acoustic transparent, it was, I think it's fair to say, it was the first one that was real world priced. There was another, and I won't mention the brand, but it was very, very expensive. So it was at that very first CDO, which we always count as the birthday of the brand, September 2012, that we first showed that. It won CE Pro's Best at CEDIA. It won a few other awards that year. One reviewer called it was the first acoustic transparent screen that completely eliminated moire, the screen door artifact. And we knew if we were ever going to replace that it would have to be something that was really special. So it was probably a year and a half ago now. Jaime, our product guy, sent me a sample of the new material. And I honestly thought that he sent me the wrong thing, because I thought, this is like a matte white screen. I would always tell our dealers that, you could stand 5 or 6 feet away from an A4K acoustic transparent and think you were looking at a matte white screen. With the new one, the weave is so dense that you can literally hold it 5 or 6 inches from your face, and it appears to be a matte white screen. So it's video wise, you really give nothing up to the acoustic transparency. And what else is remarkable about it is it measures sonically. It measures as well as the A4K. And that's not to say there's no coloration. There always is, but it's so minimal that I think it's fair to compare it to a really high-end speaker grill cloth.
Okay.
In terms of its sonic transparency. The other very cool feature that we were able to do this time around was to integrate the black backing. So, which keeps light bleed from coming through or anything from behind it shining. And the black backing is actually denser as well. So it's literally white on front and black on the back, one continuous sheet. And it's also ISF certified. And it's my understanding that there's not many, historically, many acoustic transparent screens that get that certification, that get ISF ratings. So, yeah, there were some real significant upgrades, and we were able to kind of blend it in and release it without any real disruption, in stock level. So we went pretty seamlessly from the A4K to the new one, to the AT8 ISF. Very small price. I think the price increase was 4%. So and we redesigned the edge-free frame, and with our screens too. All the edge-free frames come included with the wraparound 6-color LED kit, which originally was designed for overscan. The early days of edge-free screens, you were almost certainly going to get overscan, and the LEDs would help blend that out. Now the blanking is better, and you still might get it, but most of the projectors I've seen, it's pretty easy to trim out, even with a thin edge screen frame, and not have that overscan. So.
Now you tell me, after all these years of just thinking that was kind of a design feature of a room,
Yeah.
You're tricking me.
Yeah, well, it has kind of hung around as kind of bling in a sense, but so yeah, it doesn't. It's not as, I don't think it's as critical or as essential as it used to be, but I think in the mind of most end users, that edge free equals wraparound LEDs, and it's a cool look. And like I say, you can always turn it off. But I know there are companies out there that are still charging a fair premium for those, but we do include them. Yeah.
Well, so one of the other categories that I had noticed on your website was the application of outdoor projection screens, and that was
Yes.
something that the outdoor living spaces, whether it's motorized shades entering in the space,
Right.
or obviously video in general, but I hadn't thought about actually the motorized projection screen as well. And so you've got your Twilight Electric series for that.
Yes, we did a tentative run with the Twilight series just before COVID, and they did okay. Our timing wasn't great season wise, but then that hit. We did kind of have to reprioritize a little bit. But then last summer, we reintroduced it and have several offerings now, including one we just released. Again, given our timing, it was kind of later in the summer, but nevertheless, a battery powered outdoor screen. And it's definitely a growing category. And all of our screens are IP33 rated, which means all critical electronics are basically encased, and rust resistant metals and paints and so forth, and screen material, of course. But yeah, they're very good. They're very aggressively priced, and the battery powered material, it's tab tensioned, it is also ISF certified. So yeah, we're proud of those. We'll going into 24, we're going to do a much bigger push, and we'll continue to sort of build out the line. We decided to kind of take it a little bit piece by piece. So I think at this point, including all sizes, we have maybe 10 or 12 models, but we're going to expand that significantly into the coming years.
And just in terms of the corporate parent company, Elite Screens, and how you fit into the competition and the competitive environment. So
Sure.
you've got a lot of brands that people are familiar with based around the country. Elite is based in California, right?
Yes.
So it's kind of ironic
Yes.
that you left California right when you started with the company.
Right. Yeah.
You can picture where everyone is from a distance, but you operate remotely. So how is the manufacturing handled? You've got engineering and manufacturing. How is that all set up for you domestically versus overseas and that sort of thing?
Right. So early on, we knew EPV was going to be completely autonomous in terms of product design and product manufacture from Elite, and they're the much bigger company. I'll often talk about it to dealers in the regard of we're kind of like, to use the inevitable car metaphor, we're sort of like the Lexus to their Toyota. Okay. Although it's not as though we're a lot more money necessarily. We are, it's a step up, it's a premium brand. We don't share anything, so to speak. All the EPV materials are proprietary, and designed only for EPV. And for the most part, we're built in completely separate factories and in completely different countries. And that's it, to some degree, it's just the way that worked out, right? But it's great because it gives us the autonomy to do what we need to do, right? And obviously there are whole categories of screens that Elite does that we just don't do, and it's not that they don't have some bearing, in the CI channel, but it's just like we knew very early on we couldn't do everything, and we weren't going to try. Okay. The number in our head was always 98%. We wanted to be able to do 98% of what any custom installer was doing within reason. So like for instance, we often get calls um, from dealers for manual screens. It's like, well, we just don't do it. But it wouldn't make sense. We looked at it. We didn't feel there was a lot we could do, in what was a really competitive category of screen, to either stand out or to add real value. So we thought, well, so kind of wrapped inside of that, all EPV dealers do have access to the elite, catalog of products. So, that's been kind of a release valve in a sense for us too. So we don't. I'm like, well, we can take care of that dealer, and it might be, once every 4 years that they need a screen like that. It's not something that's going to be repeatable and that they're going to do in every job. So that's made it easy. It was another benefit of being aligned in the way that we're aligned.
And are you for CI dealers who aren't working with you? Is the best route through a direct relationship, or are you?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
distribution, or give independent reps out there.
Excuse me. Yes, we do have reps in some territories, and we do have distributors in some territories. Okay. In the last few years, there's been some real disruptions to the broader distribution landscape. But where we have distributors, we support them fully. But yeah, a lot of them in the last few years were bought up, and their product was inserted, so to speak, and ours was not. But that's the breaks that happens. But one thing that's always made us really attractive to direct dealers is that everything on the EPV price sheet is in stock. And while it's not unheard of to have back orders, it's getting increasingly rare, right? Yeah. We reconfigured some things, especially during COVID. And yeah, we can say with almost perfect certainty that if it's on our price sheet, we can ship it, right? And we typically will ship within 24 or 48 hours. Sometimes it takes a little longer if it's the first order for a dealer. There's paperwork that needs to be done and so forth. But we certainly strive to do that. And in lieu of any other hiccup in that way, we get our stuff out pretty fast. And we also have warehouses in the West Coast in Orange County and in Westminster, Maryland. So with most of our screens, we're only 3 days away from just about anywhere. One other thing we did, and we're very glad we did it, is when we were talking to dealers very early on, in fact, even before we started shipping product, and we're asking them things about what they were looking for in a new line and what did they like about their brand, we got a lot of things that, if I'm going to paraphrase it down to one quote, they would tell me, if you can be that screen company that gets product to me undamaged, I'm your guy.
Yeah.
And the history of this category is that they're very long, odd-shaped boxes. They're easy for a shipper to pick up on one end and drag across the truck floor or the concrete or whatever, and then just drop. And historically, they're expensive to ship. So we started thinking about, okay, how could we get around that? How could we limit that? And we came upon the idea of a 6-piece frame. And we figured, well, if we do a 6-piece frame, that 12-foot box becomes 6. That means it can ship FedEx or UPS ground. And now the ground zone maps apply, right? So if it's 3 days from, say, Maryland to Kansas City, there you go, and it lowers the cost dramatically and really limits the opportunity for damage. So it was a triple win. And, one thing we've seen in the last year and a half in particular is overland freight rates have really gone up. And, I ask around, people have this theory and that theory. But unfortunately, it appears that it's here to stay for a while. Of course, everybody remembers a couple of years ago, there was that really huge bubble with overseas freight. But that came down. This one looks a little different, though. So we're, ever glad that we made that decision when we did, because it just makes things very easy to get around logistically. So,
well, add that to the list of so many things that cost more money these days, right?
Right. I know. Yeah, it's almost doubled.
Oh my gosh.
In the I would say the last year and a half. And the funny thing is, it didn't, I would say through the first, in 2021 and half of 22, I mean, COVID was pretty much over. And, nothing had really changed. And then since then, wow, so.
Well, not to end on a bummer of a note, but
right.
But what a great conversation.
But with that said,
I learned so much more about the brand from you, and it's been great getting to know you better. And thanks so much for your time, Jeff.
Thank you.
Really, really great talking.
Sure, my pleasure.
And now I know so much more about Bay City as well. So
Bay City,
you're now the second most famous Bay City native that I have heard of. So you, Madonna.
Right.
Jeff Klida is Vice President of Sales for EPV Screens, the division of Elite Screens. You can learn more about the company at epvscreens.com. And that wraps up today's show, which was produced by Residential Tech Today, IPW, and Pretty Easy Podcasts. Please check out prettyeasypodcast.com if you want professional and affordable production help on your own podcast. And if you're new to Residential Tech Talks, please subscribe to the podcast wherever you watched or listened to this episode. Also, check out all the latest residential tech news at our magazine's website, restechtoday.com, where you can also subscribe to the print or digital magazine and to our Tuesday and Thursday email newsletters. Until next time, please stay safe, stay inspired, and let us know if you have a great story to tell.
Residential Tech Talks, autonomous lighting specialist to residential tech.
Home automation, smart device, home or smart house.
This show was produced by Pretty Easy Podcasts and made possible by listeners like you. If you ever thought of doing your own podcast, please visit prettyeasypodcast.com.